On today's show, where do the Cavs sit as constructed in the Eastern Conference? We've put together some power rankings. I've got Justin Rowan. We're going to talk about it on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find this show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Leave us a 5-star review. Drop some nice words in the comments. Also, check us out on YouTube. Just search Locked On Cavs. Hit that thumbs up button. Make sure you click subscribe and click the notification bell as well so you know when the latest Locked On Cavs is hitting your feed. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cavaliers at places like Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. Today, lucky enough to be joined by Justin Rowan of the Chasedown Podcast. Does great stuff over there. You can find him on Twitter at CavsAnada. It's like Canada and Cavs put together. Very easy to remember. But what Justin and I are going to do today is discuss where the Cavs sit in the Eastern Conference hierarchy, power rankings, and the way that we're going to do this is we're going to talk about how we feel about these teams in terms of contenders. This might not exactly be where they finish at the end of the regular season. This might not be how seriously they take the regular season, but in terms of contenders, where we think that the Cavs stack up. So, Justin, I just want to get right into it. I've got Boston number one. My guess is that you're going to have the Celtics there too. If you don't, we can certainly go into a deep discussion as to why, but I think that right now is kind of a pretty unanimous thing that that's a team certainly above the Cavs.
I actually have them in the play-in, so let's go 45 minutes on Boston. No, yeah, of course, I've got them as the number one seed. I think in the regular season, it'll be interesting to see how they do with so many of their guys playing for the Olympics. You expect some kind of, fatigue, championship hangover. Porzingis probably not going to play until 2025. But when you talk about championship contention, which is how we want to weigh this, they're number one. They're the defending champs. That is a fantastic roster. One of the best, most balanced, not best starting lineups I've ever seen, but one of the most balanced starting lineups that I've seen. They're definitely number one.
So I will say with them, because obviously they're not just number one in the East, they're number one in the NBA. They've earned that. But the Cavs, and this is how I can kind of tie this back into Cleveland. One, I do think if the Cavs were healthy, and I'm curious if you agree with this, but I think if they were healthy, the Cavs probably win another game in that series. I don't think they beat the Celtics 4 times in 7 tries, but I think they win another game and they push Boston to at least 6. And then the other thing, these two teams, Cleveland and Boston, are in the same group for the NBA Cup, or whatever we're calling that in-season tournament now. I actually really like how the Cavs match up for that, because you mentioned Porzingis not going to be playing probably until 2025. And then the other aspect of that, and what makes this a big, contenders thing as opposed to regular season, Boston's got 3 guys that are on Team USA that are essentially going to have no offseason in Jason Tatum, Drew Holiday, and Derek White. And I do think to some extent that matters. It might not matter in terms of championship contender status, but I do think that is something that could have some sort of effect on them.
We've seen that historically, right? Like we have seen players that, go through the Team USA experience. You typically have a bit slower start to the season. You do see with young guys that they'll take a step forward. They will learn from that experience, competing against the best in the world. But you do see a little bit of fatigue, especially for those that have had a very lengthy, regular season and playoffs as the Boston Celtics have. I would not be surprised. Like if there's going to be a time to be playing them, that's when you want to play them. And I agree with your assessment. I mean, you look at the Cavs winning game 2 in Boston, stealing home court. They had the chance to win game 4. If Boston, they almost won game 4 without Jared Allen and without Donovan Mitchell, with Darius Garland not at full health, right? Like they were a shell of themselves, and it took Boston getting basically like a 20 free throw advantage for them to barely scrape by in that game. And you look at how the Cavs offense and defense performed against Boston in comparison to someone like Dallas. Their offense was dramatically better. Their defense was better than Dallas's in that series. They gave Boston a very good fight, and they've given them a good fight over the year. So I agree with your assessment that early in that season, if you're talking about a little weary Boston without Porzingis, that's exactly it. If you're a Cavs fan, you are happy to hear that you're going to be playing them early and often.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that's a big thing. And, if you want to believe the Cavs can win that in-season tournament, that's, I think, a big recipe. And before we started recording, you mentioned that you prefer to do, and we're doing power rankings today, you prefer to kind of put teams in tiers. And I think that's a smart thing to do. Would you have Boston in its own tier? Because I certainly think that there's a significant gap for me between the Celtics and the team I have second, third, fourth, and so on.
Yeah, I would say my first tier is Boston, out of respect. I will say, we've seen defending champs in the past feel like they are in a class of their own compared to the rest of the league. And as good as Boston was, I still do believe that was a beatable team. I think there are certain matchups, even healthy in the Eastern Conference or in the Western Conference that could have pushed them in a competitive series. But I would have Boston, let's call it a half tier above, just out of respect. But I do think that, when you have a bunch of guys that just came together, and you have some guys in Tatum and Brown that have been there for a while, but everybody was sacrificing to win a championship, it's always interesting to see how that dynamic carries forward to that next year, especially when you have, Jaylen Brown, who isn't happy about being left off Team USA. Is there still going to be that same level of sacrifice and all that? That's going to be a really interesting dynamic to track going into next season.
All right, so who do you have behind Boston? Who's your number 2 team in the Eastern Conference as of right now?
So I have a tier of 4 teams here, and I will put at the top of that tier. And part of my reasoning here is I really do value continuity. I think continuity is incredibly important in the NBA, and I have the Cavs as number 2. I'm going to be that homer here. I'm going to be that person. For those that are locked on, loyal listeners and don't listen to Chasedown, what I typically like to do is I look to the optimistic side of what I believe to be as possible, because before I'm an analyst, before I'm anything else, I'm a fan. But I truly do believe that the Cavs, because of the continuity, I'm still putting them up at number 2, because I've got questions about some of these other teams. I think that they're all really good. I think they're all in the same tier. I believe, when you look at, bit mild spoiler here, but Cleveland, New York, Philly, and Milwaukee, I think all of those teams can beat one another in a series, and it would come down to execution. But right now, I'm giving the Cavs just a slight edge because they had the same group returning.
Okay, I certainly understand that, and I totally get where you're coming from. My pushback there, because I've got the same group of teams in this tier. I've got the Cavs grouped with Philly and New York and Milwaukee, not in the same order you do, because I don't have the Cavs second. I think I've got the Knicks second. They have a lot of continuity.
We're going to argue about the Knicks. We're going to argue about the Knicks.
They're far from a perfect team.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. They are not a perfect team, but they've got a lot of continuity. I would have liked to have seen what they would have been able to do this past postseason had Julius Randle been healthy. I think the Bridges pickup has become a little bit overrated. He's a really good basketball player, but I don't know that he was worth everything they gave up. I think part of that was, a New York State tax that they had to pay, considering who they traded with. I don't know that he was worth 5 first-round picks.
I'll say this: when you have a surplus, they were in position to kind of overpay in that way, especially when they weren't giving up any players of value. And when you just have this stockpile of picks, teams know you have that stockpile of picks. The OKC is never going to pay sticker price in a trade moving forward, because everyone knows you're sitting on 25 picks. It is nothing for you to part with a couple of those. So in New York's position, I do like what they, in terms of that price, I would be comfortable with it as a Knicks fan, but I do have some questions about how that's all going to gel, and I'm really excited to get into that with you.
Yeah, and I think that their front court's a little thin. Obviously, losing Isaiah Hartenstein, and considering what the injury histories of Julius Randle and Mitchell Robinson have been, I can absolutely see an argument down past there. And, you could make the same case for Philadelphia, where Joel Embiid, is he ever going to make it through a postseason where he's fully healthy? I don't know. Tyrese Maxey looks like a star, but Paul George has had really significant injury history too. So I can see an avenue for the Cavs to be number 2, but I don't think that I have, and it's hard to say this because other than Milwaukee, who I'm not high on, and I'm curious where you have them at in your second tier, other than them, none of these teams have made it to a conference finals, right?
Yeah.
Like the Bucks have won a title, which feels like forever ago, and the circumstances of them winning that title are a little bit interesting, I think it's fair to say, just with where the NBA was at coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's a very, very interesting tier. But I think I need to see what the Cavs look like under Kenny Atkinson and how this offense gels, because they've got a lot of continuity on the floor. But I do think that there's going to be some time that they need to take with, and it's totally fair, and there's going to be growing pains. There's always growing pains when you insert a new lead voice like Kenny Atkinson. But I'm curious how long it takes for it to all gel and what it looks like once it does. So this, I could absolutely see a world where in February the Cavs look great and they're the leader of this second tier. But until I see it under a new coach, I'm just going to be a little bit hesitant.
I totally understand that. And as someone that just went to go see Deadpool today because it was a day off for me, I'm making an educated wish when it comes to the Cleveland Cavaliers that, it is going to mesh, right? Like, I'm assuming that Darius Garland is going to get back to the player he was at the very least in that first year with Donovan Mitchell back. I'm assuming that Evan Mobley can take a step forward. But when it comes to the Knicks, I'm just very interested to see how that roster gels, because you have a bunch of guys that are very accustomed to playing 38 to 40 minutes per game that are going to be coming in off the bench. Like Dante DiVincenzo was terrific for them when Julius Randle was out, playing big minutes, got comfortable in a larger role. How is he going to adjust to a smaller role? How is Josh Hart going to adjust to a smaller role? Because what we've seen from Tom Thibodeau in the past, he absolutely refuses to play Julius Randle at the 5. That means you're probably going to be starting Brunson, Bridges, OG, Randall, and Robinson. You've got 2 guys that can dribble in that lineup, and one of them is Julius Randle. Like, that is tough from a playmaking standpoint. Then you factor in, okay, Knicks fans all freaked out when Johnny Bryant left the team because he was the one credited for getting the offense kind of out of the mud, right? This finally got us to a modern place. And now you don't have that as an element. I just think that there's, you have the tension of potentially DiVincenzo wanting to get the minutes. Are we going to play small ball without Randall? What does that do for the locker room? OG and Mitch Robinson are going to miss 40 games apiece. You don't have a lot of depth there behind Robinson. I think you can survive the OG injury because you have Hart and DiVincenzo and Deuce McBride. But, if Robinson's missing time, you don't have Hartenstein. So I think that there's more kind of personnel and how they mesh questions than people are giving it credit for.
I think the roster looks really good on paper, and you and I both know, everyone knows, you don't play games on paper, you play them on hardwood. So all these teams in this tier have significant, I think, questions about them. You can bring up, I think, a lot of flaws with the Knicks. I think you can bring up flaws with the Cavs, Philly, Milwaukee, and so on down the list. I want to keep talking about this. I think this is a great conversation. We're going to continue it next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime, of course, is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, and that makes getting tickets to MLB games faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer that it gets to first pitch. So maybe you're somebody that you want to go to a game, but you can't really plan ahead. You don't know what your day-to-day is going to be like. But when 6 o'clock rolls around and the Cleveland Guardians are about to get underway against the Arizona Diamondbacks, you fire up that Gametime app and you decide, hey, I'm going to go down to the corner of Carnegie and Ontario. I'm going to watch the best team in baseball play tonight. You can get a great deal by going to Gametime and doing that. I went to a Guardians game not too long ago. Gametime was the place that I went to get my tickets. It was easy for me. It'll be easy for you as well. They've got all-in prices, last-minute deals, and they'll show you the view from your seat. So when you pull up to whatever section you're in, you're already going to know what it looks like. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So in this tier, we've got New York, we've got the Cavs, we've got Philly, we've got Milwaukee. I think you explained the Cavs really well, and certainly I gave my piece too. We've talked plenty about the Knicks. The one team that I can't decide where to put them in this tier. I ended up putting them near the bottom of it, but that's the Milwaukee Bucks. They're of this group, the team that's got championship experience. They've got arguably the best player in this group in Giannis Antetokounmpo, but the rest of that roster just feels like it is really old and hanging on for dear life right now.
Yeah, and I didn't say where I have New York. New York I have third. Milwaukee I have fifth. I have Milwaukee at the bottom of this tier as well. After the coaching change, going to Doc Rivers, they were a below 500 team. That was even with Giannis, right? And I like some of the additions that they made, but again, it feels a little Phoenix Suns, Los Angeles Lakers of last offseason, where we love the transaction. We think of everything as just an immediate plus. You added Gary Trent Jr. Oh, you added DeLon Wright. So you're the winner of the offseason, just like the Lakers and Suns of last offseason. But the fact that it's a bit of a red flag for me that Toronto, as a team that is starving for young talent, let Gary Trent Jr. go, not willing to pay him even the taxpayer mid-level exception. The defense fell off for him the last couple of years. You're not getting a lot of shot creation. How is he going to adjust to a role on a team where he's going to be expected to have a very defined role, but he's also trying to earn a larger contract, because it's very difficult for NBA players to go down to a minimum salary and then work their way back up, even if they show value. Look at Andre Drummond, who's turned himself into a good role player, but can't get himself out of that minimum conversation. So I just think there's a lot of questions there. Dame did not look like himself. And, it's, when you're 34 years old as a small guard, it's not as likely to bounce back as, if I'm looking at the wheel of probabilities through my, wine and gold colored glasses with all the biases, in there. I'm going to say Darius Garland getting back to his playing weight and being healthy and being the guy that he was for the 3 prior years is more likely than, a 34, 35-year-old turning back the clock.
Right. I completely agree with that, because so you can look at their roster, and who can you look at when you just go up and down and say it's possible that guy has the best year of his career this year. You can say it about Giannis, and I think it's fair to say about Giannis. Other than that, in terms of key players, you can't say it about Chris Middleton. You can't say it about Brook Lopez. I don't think you can say it about Damian Lillard. I just think that is a team that they definitely went all in. I don't know that going all in for Damian Lillard was the right move to make at the time they made it, but I don't see an exit strategy here, and I don't know how I could consider them a championship contender unless Giannis just decides, hey, I'm going to go be the best player in the world, which I guess is possible. I don't see that happening, but that's really the only avenue, I think, to put them ahead of the Cavs in this discussion.
Yeah, and they're all within the same tier, right? I do believe that the Bucks could beat the Cavs in a series. I believe the Bucks can beat the Celtics in a series, right? We've kind of gone back in terms of where the NBA is at to a place where it's going to come down to matchups, it's going to come down to execution. Even if you're not as good on paper, it's about who is best in a small sample size of a week and a half, and variance and all that kind of stuff can happen. And I think sometimes we think just too strictly championship or Bucks, championship or Bucks. Yeah, there we go. But you're in a spot where if you're the Bucks, I think your best path forward is to just proceed forward. Try to be as good as you can. Hope that you get some breaks, because there's not a lot of easy avenues to improve the team or to really pivot. I've seen people even theorize, could they move Dame to Miami and give him his wish after all and get that package? I don't think that's the best course of action. I think when you are a good team and you're within kind of the second tier, you're within a puncher's chance of beating a team like Boston and all these other teams, just go for it, man. You're going to get a good regular season. You're going to have a shot in the playoffs. And ultimately, as a fan, that's what you want for your team. And I think too often we lose sight of that.
So we both had Boston 1. You had the Cavs 2nd. I had New York 2nd, the Cavs 3rd. You had the Knicks 3rd, We both had Milwaukee 5th. That means we both had Philadelphia 4th. Why'd you put them there?
So I think Philly has the biggest potential to make me look stupid. I mean, all of these teams have the potential to make me look stupid, Cavs included. But I think when it comes to Philly, the top end talent of Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey is like, it's substantial. How that all gels is going to be really interesting to me because Maxey really took off when Embiid wasn't there. How does it work with not only Embiid back, but also now integrating a big piece in Paul George? I like some of the additions that they moved. Kelly Oubre had a really nice season for them. I'm a fan of his game. But when you have like Kelly Oubre and Caleb Martin as your 4th and 5th best player, arguably, like I don't think Kyle Lowry is that guy. Like, that gets dicey in a hurry. Like, those guys are probably maybe 8 on the Cavs. Like, if you just drop them onto the Cavs roster, they probably like 7 and 8. That'd be about where we're having that conversation. For a team that is reliant on, its top end talent, and that top end talent does miss, significant amounts of times. You're going to have to, I think with the East being so competitive and the NBA being so competitive, you're going to actually have to really put in work in the regular season. You're going to need to gel, and you're going to need to be clicking at a high level come playoffs. I don't think it's enough to simply just get healthy at the right time. I think you have to have that chemistry and continuity locked down. Philly's a team I just don't know if they're going to get that.
So I think Philly has the highest potential of any team in this group. Like, I think that they can win the title. But I think that with what the East is going to look like this year, one, I think it's going to be very important to have home court advantage in the first round. Like, a team that finishes 5th or 6th or is in the play-in the way the Sixers were last year is not going to win the Eastern Conference, and they're not going to win the title, obviously. I have Philly 4th because of the teams in this tier. While I think that they have the most potential to win the title, I also think because of the injury history to 2 of their 3 best players in Joel Embiid and Paul George, I think they also have the potential to find themselves in the play-in the way they did last year. So It's, for me, I'm kind of putting them in the middle here just as a way to balance out what could go wrong, not because I'm pessimistic towards them, but because we've seen it with everybody but Tyrese Maxey. Like, we've seen Joel Embiid miss so many games. We've seen Paul George. And I know that, he's tried to play in back-to-backs, certainly over the last year with the Clippers, but we've seen him miss a ton of time too. So it's just hard for me to believe that before I see it all come together, if that makes sense.
It does. And honestly, I think we did the same thing because I can almost guarantee you both of us will be wrong about Philly. It's just going to be in one direction or the other. Like, they're probably not going to be 4th or 5th. They're probably either going to be like 2nd or 7th. Because I just don't see a lot of kind of median outcomes occurring when it comes to the Sixers. And, they had the same thing going for them as the Knicks too, in that Nick Nurse is going to play guys 40 minutes per game. How's that going to work out? Right. Like, it makes a little bit more sense on Philly because they are so top heavy. But, that comes with its own set of challenges when you're dealing with guys that have an injury history and in the case of Embiid, even like a conditioning issue.
So teams are going to finish below the Cavs. There are a group of teams that both Justin and I think are clearly below the Cavs. We're going to dive into who we think that is next on today's Locked On Cavs. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. The Cavs, they want to be at peak performance. You should want your vehicle to be at peak performance as well. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, all 3 of those, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts, it's so many parts. For your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So up next, after we've gone through that second tier of teams that, realistically you could see winning the Eastern Conference. You absolutely could see being in the conference finals. You could see making deep playoff runs and giving the Boston Celtics a significant series on their hands. Now we kind of go to the teams that I think are fighting to stay out of the play-in. Maybe if things really go their way, fighting for a number 4 seed. The first team I have in this third tier is the team that pushed the Cavs to 7 games in the first round this past year, and that's the Orlando Magic, Justin. I think that if Paolo Banchero continues to improve his game, he's going to be a problem, as the kids say. I'm not super high on Franz Wagner. I'm a little surprised he got a max contract extension this summer from the Magic, but I think that this is a team that they improved a little bit, but ultimately they're just going to go as far as Paolo Banchero takes them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have them 5th as well. I think they're probably the closest into elevating outside of that tier. And that's going to fall on the shoulders of Paolo, not only because your best player is going to typically be the one that dictates how high your ceiling is, but I also think with their roster construction, they kind of really need him to be that point forward. And we saw him do it at times in the playoffs. There were other times where he's turnover prone, but particularly with going with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope rather than Gary Harris, KCP is a upgrade in almost every facet of the game except for playmaking. Gary Harris, has played some point guard in the past, and I think that combo of 2 combo guards in he and Jalen Suggs kind of helped them, get the point going. Markelle Fultz gave them some good minutes. You're not going to have that with KCP and Suggs as the full-time point guard, so I think Paolo's evolution as a point forward is going to dictate whether this is a very good defensive team that is, a little up and down on the offensive end of the court, or if it's a team that the pieces are really starting to fit together. Because I love Jalen Suggs playing off of a front court initiator if Paolo can get that level consistently.
I think if this Orlando Magic team was in its current state like 4 or 5 years ago, we probably would have them a tier higher. But because the Eastern Conference, I think at the top is much deeper than it really has been in a really long time. When you talk about all the teams that we've already talked about, it's hard for me to boost them up. Not because I don't think Paolo's a blossoming star, but I just don't think that you can win having a guy as good as Paolo and as young as Paolo, and just say, here, you got to carry us on your shoulders. And I think that, yes, KCP is a really good addition. I think he brings some much needed shooting. We all saw in that series, especially in Cleveland, how bad they were shooting from beyond the arc, and KCP will help with that. But I just don't think that their offense has enough firepower. And I think that's an issue when you get to the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, let's break it down real simply. Like, top end talent really does matter. And like Boston, check. Cleveland has 4 all-star caliber guys. New York has, it's kind of the like role player Avengers for the most part, but you do have 2 all NBA talents in Brunson and Randall, right?
Exactly.
So when you have all A+ or A- role players surrounding 2 all NBA talents, you're a really good team. Philly, obviously they have the top end talent. Milwaukee, obviously they have the top end talent and arguably the best player in the Eastern Conference. Orlando, they have Paolo and Franz. Like, he's going to need to live up to that contract, right? Like, he's going to need to elevate his game to show, yeah, like I'm more than, a Tobias Harris type. I can get to that Paul George type, right? Like I can be that internal upgrade, right? And I just think that the floor and what we have proven with so many of these other teams ahead of them in terms of how good that top end talent is, that really does matter in the NBA. So that's why I still kind of have them. And have them a tier below. And as important as Paolo is, Franz taking that next step and rediscovering his jumper and elevating his game beyond what we've seen in the past, forget where he was 2 years ago, that's probably going to need to occur if they're going to elevate themselves into that second tier.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Who did you have after the Orlando Magic? Because there's a team that made its way to the conference finals that we haven't even mentioned yet.
Yeah, it's Indy for me as well. I really do like them. I think they're a team that makes a lot of sense together on paper. I like that they get out and run. I just, it feels like where they belong. Like, I think everything kind of broke right for them to have an Atlanta Hawks type conference finals run. But, like how far you advance it just doesn't matter as much
Right.
as like how it looks, right? Like we know why that occurred. Like we know why they got past the Knicks. We know, you know, how deficient they looked against the Celtics, even comparison to like the Cavs without Mitchell and Allen, right? Like it didn't look as good. And I really like Tyrese Halliburton. I think he's the guy that when you talk about who might benefit from the Team USA experience, even though he's not playing a lot, I can really see him benefiting from that time with Team USA. But, you know, like Pascal Siakam is what he is. He might even be taking a step back. Like we've seen some regression from him the last couple of years. And again, it gets back to that kind of top end talent conversation. So I like them. I think, you know, going back to what you said earlier, 10 years ago, this is probably one of those teams that the Cavs would face in later rounds of the playoffs. Right. But that's true of just about every one of these teams ahead of them as well.
Yeah. I don't think you're wrong at all. I think you might be a little bit higher on them than I am. I think that there are a lot of similarities between that, what was it, the 2021 Atlanta Hawks that made their way to the conference finals in the Pacers. Yeah. I think Tyrese Halliburton might be a little bit more sustainable than what the Hawks were doing offensively. And I do like Pascal Siakam. I think this team probably has a little bit more talent than that Hawks team did. But, you know, I think there's an alternate reality where Indiana holds the tiebreaker over the Magic and the Pacers get the 5 seed and they lose to the Cavs in 6 games in that first round. Meanwhile, the Magic end up in the conference finals. We're talking about Paolo Banchero and we're talking about Orlando the same way, just because of how everything broke right their way, where Giannis didn't play in that series when they took on Milwaukee. And then everyone on the Knicks gets hurt and Jalen Brunson breaks his hand in game 7. It just, everything that could go their way does. And then ultimately they run into a much better team and get swept. So I do think that there's an alternate reality where we're talking about the Indiana Pacers the way we're talking about the Orlando Magic and vice versa. And I just think that's a fun thing to think about. But it would not surprise me even a little bit if they're in the play-in this year.
Yeah, and you know, they're going to be at the top of the play-in. Like I think they're going to be in the 7 and 8 because they're a really good team, but that just goes to show you how deep the Eastern Conference is. And I agree with you, right? Like I think if Orlando fell on the other side of the bracket, I think they would have made the conference finals. If the Cavs won game 82, they probably made the conference finals. But like for me, I don't lose sleep over that because I don't think the Cavs of last year were a championship contender, even if they were fully healthy. I think they needed more experience. I think they needed more seasoning. And obviously the trajectory of Evan Mobley is going to be the biggest thing there. But I don't lose sleep over, hey, like we could have got a conference finals run if, you know, we were on the other side of bracket, because the most important thing for me is how do you match up against the Boston Celtics? Were you like thoroughly outclassed when you played against them? And, you know, I thought the Cavs acquitted themselves well, given the circumstances there. Obviously, no Porzingis for Boston was a factor, but also no Jared Allen, also injured Donovan Mitchell and Garland, right? Like, I thought that they got enough useful data from that series to kind of inform how they wanted to proceed going into this year.
Yeah, and that I do think is an important thing. Behind Indiana, I had Miami. I like some of the things Miami has. I think that, you know, you mentioned Team USA for Tyrese Halliburton. I think Team USA, again, this is not Bam's first time on Team USA, but Bam Adebayo on Team USA will be another very good thing for him. I question with where Jimmy Butler is at health-wise. He has missed some time with significantly with knee injuries over the last couple of years. So I think that they're getting dangerously close to needing to pivot into something that the Heat never want to do, and that is a rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, they just lost Caleb Martin, right? Like they're losing talent. They're going the wrong direction. I really like Jaime Jaquez. I think that there's a high upside for Jovic as well. That's going to take time, man. Like it takes a lot of time, and you know, it's going to take giving them enough reps for them to get kind of those developmental lessons. And that doesn't usually coincide with winning. It's, you know, not only questioning the health of Jimmy Butler, but questioning the buy-in, right? Like you've kind of had that back and forth between him and Pat Riley throughout this offseason. That's a really tough spot to be in. As much as I like Jaime Jaquez, like that's still, you know, a 6'6" wing with a questionable jumper that's 25 years old now. Like it's like I don't think I think he's a very good rotation player, but not someone that's going to turn a franchise around, right? Like I think, I've shared this with you privately, but I love the comparison of Jalen Tyson being Jaime Jaquez with a 3-ball. Like there's both that 6'6" kind of slower athlete that wins on strength and whatnot, but like neither of those guys, as much as I like Tyson, and if he is a Jaime Jaquez with a 3-ball, I still don't think that's like a franchise changing talent. So Miami, I just think they've fallen behind the rest of the Eastern Conference, and I don't think there's catching up to them.
Yeah, I'm with you. And, ultimately you can't rely on, with everything that Jimmy Butler's body has been through, I don't know that he can be someone you can rely on to go on deep playoff runs anymore. And it was a great story a couple of years ago when they were an 8 seed that found themselves in the finals. But I think it's more likely now that they're an 8 seed that finds themselves losing in the first round, as most 8 seeds do. And there's not necessarily shame in that, but I just wonder how much longer they want to keep this up. Is there any team that we've not talked about to this point that you think is worth bringing up?
So I guess my 9-10 is I'm giving Atlanta the benefit of the doubt just because
this is where it becomes difficult, because I think there are 8 teams that are worth talking about, and then after it's like, well, someone's got to be in the play-in.
I mean, Cooper Flagg's going to be awesome, man. He's going to be really damn good. And I think that's going to be a dynamic in this year where even with the flat-end lotto odds, like there's so many teams that are just so clearly out of it, particularly in the East. I can see that race starting early. I have 3 teams that I think can contend for the 9 and 10 seed. I'm putting Atlanta there just because I don't think there's the motivation for them to really go into the tank again. Even when they were in this position. I think losing DeJounte Murray is going to hurt, but Trae Young with shooters, a roll of big. Dyson Daniels is a nice pickup. I like Jalen Johnson. Like I just think there's more there than most. And then my 10, I'm going between 2 teams, and I think it's going to come down to who's the most healthy. I have the Detroit Pistons and the Charlotte Hornets.
Oh, wow. I had Atlanta at 9. I had Toronto at 10. I just think I think Toronto is going to not be good, but I think somebody has to be 10th. Charlotte, I need to see LaMelo be healthy. Like I don't believe that. I can't believe in him until he shows me something on the floor. Like, how many games has he played in the last couple of seasons? I don't believe it's in triple digits, and that's not a good sign. Yeah. And then, I like Detroit. I think JB Bickerstaff's going to do a great job in Detroit, but I think they're probably a year away from being 10th. That said, I think Cade Cunningham is awesome there. I really do. I think he's got a super high ceiling.
Yeah, I love Cade Cunningham, and like LaMelo would need to play. Like he's going to need to play, 75 games like he did 3 years ago, right? Like it's going to need to be that high. Whatever the heck was going on with Mark Williams last year, that needs to be kind of resolved because I really like him as a player. I love Brandon Miller as a player, and Miles Bridges can still make an impact. I just feel like if they're all healthy and LaMelo's healthy, I think he raises the floor more than a Scotty Barnes does in Toronto, more than a Cade Cunningham does in Detroit. Like I feel like of that group of kind of the singular stars on these flawed teams, LaMelo has the highest ceiling there. Toronto, I think, is too far away. Like obviously RJ had a really good season after being traded to the Raptors.
And Team Canada. He's been good with Canada.
He's been very, very good for Team Canada, and that's a lot of fun. I think that roster is really flawed, and unless Scotty can take a sizable leap, I don't see him kind of covering all those cracks. And I think there might be a motivation there. They've kind of been humbled these last couple of years. I can see them still being like, we did just lose our lotto pick to the Spurs. We just did lose our 7th overall pick here for Jakob Poeltl. Let's get a high pick in a very good draft and get Scotty a running mate to go along with what we have in Quickly, what we have in RJ and all that. I can just see the temptation being there for Toronto.
I think the temptation is there for all of the teams that we've listed in this conversation.
Of course.
But somebody has to be 10th. Like the team that is going to finish 10th in the Eastern Conference at this point, while their executives, their front office folks are on vacation, taking a tropical vacation right now, they're thinking about what their team would look like with Cooper Flag on it. Mm-hmm. One of those teams is going to finish 10th in the plan. That's just the way the East looks right now.
Yep. It really is.
It is the, I think there's 9 teams that we can kind of lock into postseason play of some sort. And then it's, well, somebody's got to be 10th. But Justin, thank you so much for doing this. This was a blast. You can check out everything Justin does. Find him on Twitter at CavsDanada. Check out his podcast, the Chasedown Podcast, a part of the Cavs media family. Excellent stuff over there. Justin, thank you again for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
You can check out Locked On Cavs as your first listen every day. Find us wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Also, check us out on YouTube. Search Locked On Cavs on YouTube. Click that notification bell. Make sure you are subscribed. And if you're still watching that video, hit that thumbs up button. It helps us to grow the show. Thank you once again for making today's show your first listen, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network.